Jamie Liu, a freelance travel writer with a penchant for the obscure, was always on the hunt for hidden gems, the forgotten trails, the untouched vistas, the camping spots so remote they barely registered on modern maps. Her current obsession was documenting obscure campgrounds across America, a quest that had led her down countless dusty roads and through forgotten towns. It was this very pursuit that, on a sweltering mid-July afternoon in 2022, brought her to a cryptic old forum post flickering like a dying ember on her laptop screen, mentioning a place called Ash Pine Retreat. The post spoke of a forgotten site in rural Oregon, a campground so off the map it seemed to exist only in whispers and faded memories. It promised unparalleled isolation, a pristine wilderness untouched by the digital world, far from the reach of cell phone reception. Lured by the irresistible pull of curiosity and the promise of absolute solitude, a rare commodity in their increasingly connected world, Jamie convinced her boyfriend, Brent Morales, to join her. Brent, an outdoorsy and practical man, usually grounded in reality, found himself intrigued by the challenge, though a faint, almost imperceptible shadow of past trauma from a near-drowning incident still lingered in his eyes. Their journey began with a long, winding drive that quickly devolved from paved roads to gravel, then to little more than a forgotten deer trail. The dense pine forests of rural Oregon pressed in on all sides, the trees growing taller, older, their branches intertwined overhead, creating a perpetual twilight even in the blistering heat of midsummer. The air grew heavy, humid, and thick, with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. As they drove deeper, the last bars of cell phone reception flickered and died, severing their last connection to the outside world. Finally, after hours of navigating through the increasingly oppressive woods, the faint outline of a clearing appeared through the trees. It was Ash Pine Retreat. The campground was less a sight and more forgotten scar on the landscape. A single ancient fire pit, choked with decades of ash, stood at the center. Around it, the skeletal remains of crumbling cabins, their timbers blackened and scarred, hinted at a violent past. The sense of isolation was absolute, profound, almost suffocating in its intensity. As they explored the desolate clearing, a profound unease settled over Jamie. Scorched totems, crudely carved from pine branches and blackened by fire, hung from the trees, swaying gently in a breeze that wasn't there. They resembled distorted human figures, their limbs twisted in grotesque poses, their eyeless faces seeming to watch their every move. Brent, ever practical, tried to dismiss them as old hunting markers, but the chill that prickled Jamie's skin had nothing to do with the summer heat. Despite the blazing heat of the July sun, the woods around Ash Pine Retreat were unnaturally cold. A biting chill, damp and pervasive, seeped into their very bones, a stark contradiction to the oppressive heat wave that gripped the rest of Oregon. It was a cold that felt ancient, a cold that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible smell of smoke and something else, something metallic and rotten, like stagnant water and decaying leaves. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and angry red, the whispers began. Faint at first, like the rustle of leaves that wasn't the wind, then growing subtly louder, indistinct voices carried on currents of air that didn't stir the branches. Shadows flickered at the periphery of their vision, darting between the thick pine trunks, always just out of sight when they turned their heads. Something was watching them, something ancient and malevolent. Then they met them. Zoe and Ty, another couple, seemingly too friendly, too eager to share their space in this desolate place. They emerged from the deeper woods, their smiles wide, almost predatory, their eyes a little too bright. They claimed that they'd been coming to Ashpine Retreat for years, drawn by its solitude, its unique energy. Jamie found their story unsettling. A place this forgotten, this remote, shouldn't have regular visitors, let alone two who seemed so perfectly at ease in its unsettling embrace. Over the course of their first evening, as the unnatural cold deepened and the whispers grew more insistent, Zoe and Ty's stories began to subtly shift. Details changed, timelines blurred, and their explanations for their long-standing connection to the campground became increasingly vague, almost evasive. Jamie, her skepticism warring with a growing sense of dread, noticed the inconsistencies. The way their eyes would dart towards the deep shadows of the forest whenever a particularly chilling whisper echoed through the trees. That night, as the campfire burned with an unnaturally low, almost blue flame, Brent saw it. He had excused himself to relieve himself in the deeper woods, and through the dense foliage, illuminated by a fleeting flash of lightning, he saw Zoe. She was kneeling, her back to him, her hands extended toward something human-shaped, obscured by the shadows. She appeared to be feeding it, a grotesque, silent communion in the heart of the haunted woods. He stumbled back to the fire, his face pale, his eyes wide with a terror he couldn't yet articulate. The sight of Zoe feeding something unseen in the woods shattered Brent's practical veneer, replacing it with a chilling, dawning horror. He tried to explain it to Jamie, his voice a strained whisper, but the words caught in his throat, too monstrous to articulate. The unnatural cold intensified, seeping into their tent, and the faint smell of smoke and rot, which Jamie had initially dismissed as a lingering scent from the old fire pit, now seemed to cling to everything, a pervasive, sickening odor that hinted at something far more sinister. Jamie, already teetering on the edge of her own anxieties, began to hallucinate. The shadows cast by the flickering campfire seemed to writhe and stretch, morphing into grotesque figures. She saw glimpses of her own death, replayed again and again in vivid, terrifying flashes. The urban home invasion, the faces of her attackers, the feeling of helplessness, now intertwined with the oppressive darkness of the forest. Her past trauma was being weaponized, twisted by an unseen force that knew her deepest fears. Brent, meanwhile, became convinced they were meant to come here, as if led by something ancient and malevolent. He spoke of a pull, an undeniable force that had guided them to Ashpine Retreat, a sense of destiny that was both terrifying and strangely compelling. His usual cynicism had evaporated, replaced by a chilling conviction that they were part of a larger, darker design, drawn into a web woven by something beyond human comprehension. The supernatural elements intensified with each passing hour. The campfire, which had initially burned with an unnaturally low blue flame, now pulsed with an eerie, almost ethereal glow. And when the whispers grew particularly loud, when the shadows seemed to coalesce into a hulking, formless presence just beyond the tree line, fine black ash, like microscopic snow, would begin to fall from the clear night sky, settling on their clothes, their skin, burning with an invisible heat if touched directly. One afternoon, while exploring the crumbling remains of a cabin deeper in the woods, Jamie stumbled upon an abandoned camera, its casing water damaged, but its memory card miraculously intact. With trembling hands, she managed to retrieve the footage. What played on the small, flickering screen was a nightmare made real, a family, their faces contorted in terror, trapped inside a tent as it was consumed by an inferno, their screams abruptly silenced by the roaring flames. It was a horrifying testament to the campground's violent past, a chilling premonition of their own potential fate. Later that night, as the unnatural cold deepened and the whispers grew more insistent, they found an old, rusted walkie-talkie near the fire pit. When Brent fiddled with the dial, it crackled to life, not with static, but with faint, distorted voices. They were pleading, sobbing, screaming, the voices of past victims, trapped in an endless loop of terror, their final moments echoing through the static, a horrifying chorus of the damned. The Ashman, they realized, was not just a legend. He fed on fear, paranoia, and pain. Zoe and Ty, their initial friendliness now replaced by an unsettling, almost manic intensity, began to reveal their true cult-like nature. They spoke in cryptic phrases, their eyes gleaming in the firelight. "The fire purifies," Zoe murmured, her voice a low, hypnotic hum. "Join the fire, Brent. Be reborn. It is the only way." They hinted at a ritual, a sacrifice, a communion with the ancient entity that haunted these woods, their words laced with a chilling conviction that made Jamie's blood run cold. Jamie, her mind already fractured by hallucinations and sleep deprivation, began to doubt her own memories. Were they ever alone? Had she been here before? Fragmented images, half-remembered sensations, flickered at the edges of her consciousness, making her question the very foundation of her reality. The mimic spirit's psychological assault was relentless, blurring the lines between her past trauma and the terrifying present, making her believe she was succumbing to madness. The Ashman's presence became almost palpable. He appeared as a Fiangu, scorched figure, tall and coal-black, his form barely discernible against the deepening shadows of the tree line. He was eyeless, yet Jamie felt his gaze, a cold, ancient malevolence that pierced through her very soul. He didn't move, merely watched, a silent sentinel of dread, dragging behind him a faint trail of black ash that seemed to burn the very ground it touched, leaving a lingering scent of decay and burnt flesh. The atmosphere of dread was suffocating. Despite the summer season, the campsite was always cold, damp, and filled with the pervasive smell of smoke and rot. The sky turned a strangely ominous red each evening, a blood-soaked canvas that reflected the horrors lurking beneath. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. The forest was unnaturally silent, save for the crackling fire sounds that seemed to come from nowhere. Disembodied echoes of past infernos, a chilling symphony of the damned. The horror escalated with a brutal, visceral shock that ripped through their fragile sense of safety. One night, as the unnatural cold permeated their tent and the whispers intensified, Brent was dragged from his sleeping bag with a violent, unseen force. Jamie screamed, scrambling out of the tent, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found him just meters away, pinned to a massive pine tree, his body contorted in agony. Burning branches, still smoldering with an unholy blue flame, had been shoved into his limbs, searing his flesh, and he was still alive, screaming, his cries echoing through the silent, indifferent forest. Jamie, her mind reeling from the grotesque sight, tried desperately to free him, but the branches refused into his flesh, the heat radiating from them an unbearable torment. The air around him shimmered with black ash, burning her skin when she dared to touch it. The Ashman, a hulking, scorched silhouette, stood just beyond the tree line, watching, its eyeless gaze fixed on Brent's agony, feeding on his pain, growing stronger with every agonizing scream. Zoe and Ty emerged from the shadows, their faces illuminated by the eerie blue glow of the campfire, their eyes gleaming with a manic, almost ecstatic fervor. Zoe, with a chillingly serene expression, produced a heated blade from her pack. With deliberate, precise movements, she began to carve ritual symbols into her own face, the searing metal hissing against her skin, leaving behind raw, bleeding lines. It was a grotesque act of devotion, a horrifying testament to their twisted faith in the Ashman. The forest itself seemed to conspire against them. They found more victims, not always human, but always bearing the same gruesome hallmarks. Animals, deer, rabbits, squirrels were found skinned and twisted into horrifying, human-like shapes, their limbs arranged in grotesque, ritualistic poses, their eyes gouged out and replaced with smooth, white river stones. These were not mere kills. They were offerings, macabre works of art designed to appease the malevolent entity that haunted these woods. Jamie, her mind racing, remembered the fragmented lore from the old forum post, the whispers of the cult. The forest, she realized with a sickening lurch, was a spiritual trap. Anyone who died here, anyone who succumbed to the Ashman's hunger, fed the demon, keeping him alive, strengthening his hold on this cursed land. Their deaths were not just an end. They were a continuation, a fuel for the ancient evil that lurked in the shadows. A desperate, primal need for escape surged through her. She tried to lead Brent, barely conscious and racked with pain, away from the clearing. But every path they took, every direction they ran, inevitably looped them back to the same desolate clearing, to the burning fire pit, to the screaming agony of Brent, and to the watchful, eyeless gaze of the Ashman. The forest was a labyrinth, a living prison designed to ensure no one ever truly left. The sky, which had turned a strange, ominous red each evening, now seemed to bleed a deeper, more violent crimson that reflected the horrors unfolding below. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, rot, and the metallic tang of Brent's burning flesh. The crackling fire sounds, which came from nowhere, intensified. A chilling chorus that seemed to celebrate their impending doom, a haunting symphony. Of the damned. Jamie, her heart heavy with despair, knew there was only one way out, one way to break the cycle. The ancient lore spoke of a blood sacrifice, a willing offering to contain the spirit, or the destruction of a hidden totem altar. She remembered the cult, the fire, the whispers of a burnt-down church deep in the woods, a place of unholy communion where the Ash Man had first been born. That was it. The altar, with Brent dying, his screams fading into agonizing whimpers. Jamie knew she had to make the ultimate choice. It was a choice that would forever scar her soul. A decision born of desperation and a terrifying, dawning understanding of the true nature of the evil they faced. She looked at Zoe and Ty, their faces alight with fanaticism, their eyes fixed on Brent's suffering, waiting for the final, gruesome act. The Ash Man, a towering silhouette of charred darkness, emerged fully from the tree line, its presence a suffocating weight. It moved slowly, deliberately, dragging its trail of burning ash, its eyeless gaze fixed on Jamie, a silent demand for the ultimate sacrifice. The air crackled with its power, the forest holding its breath, waiting for her decision. The choice was clear, horrifying, and utterly inescapable. With Brent's whimpers fading into the chilling silence, Jamie made her choice. It was a decision born not of heroism, but of a desperate, primal need to survive, to break the horrifying cycle that bound them to this cursed place. She looked at Zoe and Ty, their faces alight with a disturbing fanaticism, their eyes fixed on the dying embers of Brent's life, waiting for the Ash Man's final claim. A cold, calculated resolve hardened in Jamie's eyes. She knew the lore. A blood sacrifice, a willing walk into the flames, or the destruction of the totem altar. The altar, the burnt-down church deep in the woods, was their only hope. But she couldn't leave Brent, and she couldn't sacrifice herself without a fight. The mimic spirit fed on fear, on pain, on the breakdown of sanity. Zoe and Ty were its willing acolytes, its living conduits. They were the key. With a sudden desperate surge of adrenaline, Jamie lunged, not at the Ash Man, but at Zoe. The fanaticism in Zoe's eyes shifted to surprise, then to a fleeting moment of terror as Jamie, fueled by a terrifying clarity, dragged her towards the central fire pit. Ty screamed, lunging after them, but Jamie was faster, driven by a desperate, primal instinct for survival. She threw Zoe into the fire pit, the ancient flames, unnaturally blue and hungry, roaring to life around her. Zoe shrieked, a sound of pure agony and betrayal, her body consumed by the unholy fire. As the flames engulfed her, Jamie began to chant, her voice raw and guttural, repeating the names of the dead from the found footage, the victims of the ash. Man, the family burned alive in their tent. The Millers. The Millers. The Millers. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. The Ash Man, which had been slowly approaching, suddenly recoiled, a guttural roar tearing from its charred form. The black ash that trailed behind it flared, burning brighter, then began to dissipate, swirling into nothingness. The unnatural. Cold in the air lifted, and the pervasive smell of smoke and rot began to fade, replaced by the crisp, clean scent of pine. Ty, his face contorted in a mixture of horror and rage, lunged at Jamie, but the Ashman in its dying throes seemed to lash out, a final desperate act. A tendril of black ash burning with an invisible heat whipped out, striking Ty. He screamed, his body seizing before collapsing to the ground, his skin blistering, his life force draining away, consumed by the very entity he had worshipped. Jamie, battered and bruised, her mind teetering on the edge of delirium, stumbled away from the dying flames, away from Brent's silent form, away from the dissolving Ashman. The forest, which had been a suffocating prison, now seemed to open before her, the paths no longer twisting, no longer misleading. She ran, driven by a desperate need to escape, to reach the world beyond the cursed woods. Days later, dehydrated, delirious, and barely conscious, Jamie stumbled out of the forest onto a remote logging road. A passing truck, its driver startled by her appearance, flagged down authorities. She was rescued, taken to a hospital, and slowly, painstakingly, she recounted her horrifying ordeal. The forgotten campground, the cultists, the Ashman, the burning, sacrifice. Her story was met with skepticism, with pity, with diagnoses of extreme trauma and hallucination. The authorities, humoring her, went to investigate. They followed her directions, meticulously searching the vast ancient forest. But they found nothing. No fire pit, no crumbling cabins, no scorched totems, no sign of a burnt-down church, no bodies, no ash, no lingering smell of smoke and rot. Ash Pine Retreat, they concluded, didn't exist, never did. It was a figment of her traumatized mind, a vivid hallucination born of isolation and fear. But Jamie knew. She knew what she had seen, what she had done. And her camera footage, miraculously intact, proved it. It showed her talking to Brent, laughing with Zoe and Ty around the campfire, documenting their journey into the heart of the cursed woods. Yet, in every single frame, in every single moment, despite the clear audio of their voices, despite her own interactions, Jamie was completely, utterly alone. The mimic spirit had not just haunted her mind. It had warped her reality, leaving her with a chilling, indelible truth. The horror wasn't just outside. It had always been inside her own perception.